Welcome to Trials, Tales and Trails, a podcast for life sciences, healthcare and clinical trials. Our guests tell the tales and trails we record from a Volkswagen campervan.
Hi everyone, welcome to Trials, Tales and Trails. This is episode 2 of our new podcast. Thanks for coming back in and joining us for the second one. Just a quick overview of today's guest, who is an incredibly interesting person. You're going to absolutely love to meet this individual. I'm in my home location. Andy is live right now from the van. So passing over to you, Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. We're so excited to introduce Ray Collia to you in a few minutes' time. He's got some fantastic stories to tell us on the podcast today. Ray works for Ferret. He's also involved in a few other companies, and he's going to talk a little bit about AI. He's going to talk about his brushes with the Mario Brothers, Space Invaders, karate, and he's going to share some really personal stories. So really excited and happy to introduce you to Ray Collia. Here we go. We've got Ray and Chris on the line. Welcome to both of you, particularly to Ray Collia, our guest from Ferret, episode 2 of Trials, Tales and Trails. Great to introduce you guys.
Good to see you.
Great to meet you, Ray. Honestly, talking to Andy, I've heard some really interesting things. So, really looking forward over this next 40 minutes to understanding the background.
I'm looking forward to it. It's been great communicating.
Ray's a well-known person in the clinical trials industry, but not just the clinical trials industry. His stories, his internet posts, if you don't follow him on LinkedIn, go and do so. Hugely interesting, and just one of those things I actually look forward to reading when I see them. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you on here, Ray. Tell us a little bit about your background, if you will.
My background is very varied, as you say. So I've actually spent over 36 years in sales, probably about 18 plus, very closely involved in marketing, and in life sciences, which is another story altogether. And that was a very deliberate move, which I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about today. So I actually run 3 businesses and I help out in one. It keeps me very, very busy. And the 3 businesses are Ferret, which is copywriting and voice of the customer or patient voice services, which I'd love to talk a bit about today because it's very relevant when it comes to some of the challenges that we're facing in the industry. We've also got Counterspree Publishing, which is a business publishing house. Nezu Press, which, believe it or not, is Victorian supernatural fiction. That's very different. And finally, GRGC Consultants, where I provide business coaching, mentoring when it comes to sales and marketing, particularly for small businesses and startups. So that's a very high-level view of what I do. When I started out as a teenager, I did a lot of traditional door-to-door type sales from cable TV and telephone systems. And believe it or not, you're looking at one of the very few Avon men who who existed. I believe I was the only one that anyone knew of at the time. I remember walking down the street and you could see people in their bay window having a good laugh because they could see me with the Avon bag.
Amazing.
So I've looked after customers, basically anyone from little grandmothers in their houses right up to governments, some of the biggest tech companies in the world. At the end of the day, it's people dealing with people, and that's another theme that we can talk about today as well.
Sounds like Avon were a bit ahead of their time because, if you're talking about a few years back, you would have thought that it was 99.9% females that were doing that,
yeah.
doing the rounds and, knocking on people's doors, etc.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that if you think about it, customers obviously wanted advice on things that are actually very incredibly personal that you'd imagine only a lady could actually share with another lady. But no, they got used to me and they trust my advice on products. And maybe because I was male, and I don't mean it in a mean way, that if they asked me what a particular product looked like on them, I could give them a very frank opinion and suggest something better for them, if you see what I mean. So So maybe that's why it worked out quite well at the time.
I think we're going to have to label this particular episode Avon Calling. I mean, it's Ray, like that's a huge kudos as well. I mean, Avon have got such brand loyalty as well, and I think which is quite interesting. But elements of your background are so transferable. I'd love to know the connection of when you started out, obviously involved in those kind of processes and situations. How did you find yourself in kind of the clinical research?
That was a very, very deliberate step. So for this, there's a bit more of a story, if you don't mind. So I'll actually talk about my wife. Gina, she's my co-partner in our businesses. She's a writer, author, publisher, editor, copywriter, you name it. She's just amazing, all-round genius. And when they say, when people talk about the better half, she's definitely my better half, without a doubt. We met as teenagers, and we've gone through different adventures in our life, and had a very good life, actually, for many years. And then I say had, what happened in 2007, we literally settled down to watch a DVD or a video at the time, shall I say, and got the Pringles out, got our pizza, you name it. And then suddenly she collapsed. Her body was clearly shutting down. There were all sorts of things happening to her. I didn't feel I had time to call an ambulance, so I literally picked her up, carried her down loads of steps, threw her into my car, and raced to the hospital. When we got to the hospital, she was basically literally 2 or 3 minutes from dying. So I couldn't believe it when this army, small army, a squadron of people literally leapt on her. The urgency and the speed that this hospital team were working at just threw me while I was still in shock. She was in intensive care for 3 days and 3 nights. Apart from me just going to grab a drink or a sandwich from a vending machine, I was allowed to stay by her side for those 3 days and nights, actually, just watching the machine beeping away. And I kind of knew that she was, that's it. She's either going to go or she'd managed to pull through. And I thought to myself, if she manages to pull through, I promise to whoever or whatever's listening out there, I promise that I'm going to give back in some way. After she came out of hospital, her recovery was very difficult. She couldn't remember anything for more than a few seconds. Her long-term memory was okay. She remembered who I was. Not initially, but she did eventually remember who I was. And she couldn't function, couldn't do anything by herself. So I stopped working for about a year, actually, of her 18-month recovery. And as soon as she got better, a big smile on my face, because I still remember it like it was yesterday, I moved into life sciences. I think most of all because I wanted to give back. And when I wanted to give back, I literally, my singular focus was the benefit to patients. Because whilst my wife's life was saved, it wasn't easy. And also we were left not knowing the consequences of her illness. And we were actually quite isolated for that 18-month recovery period, with not knowing what to do, how to cope with it, anything like that. And I'm not blaming the system, but I knew that there was some way that it could improve. And it would be nice to think that I stumbled into a business that could help that process of improving for patients.
I mean, look, when people talk about having like a powerful and an inspiring why, that's it in bold. I mean, like what an experience on so many levels to instantly have to put your entire life on hold, to think what the next week and the next month and year are going to be completely different to what you thought they were, huge kudos to you for kind of coming through that and also channeling those kind of experiences into something so positive in terms of what you've done since then.
Gina came through it in the most phenomenal way, which I'll mention in a minute, but I didn't do the best job in the world at looking after her, but didn't do as awful a job as I thought I would, if that makes sense. You kind of dropped in a situation you just wouldn't imagine being in. And, stopping work was not something you'd actually think of, but it was the only way. How can you look after someone who sleeps in bouts of 15 minutes on and off 24 hours a day, who doesn't know where they're coming or going from second to second, who can't stand up or walk about normally, so you have to change your life. But I tell you what, let's talk about Gina being a writer and a genius. I mean, after 18 months, she woke up one day and she just said, I'm going to write my book. And I just paused and I looked at her and I thought, I'm always supportive of her, but I thought, with all kindness, you can't actually remember what you're doing from minute to minute most of the time, so don't push yourself too hard. Within 3 months, she'd written 2 academic life works that have continues to sell to this day. And she also wrote a novel in that time as well, in 3 months from a standing start of not even being able to remember who you were for a few seconds. I mean, that is just wow.
That is wow.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
But
so yeah. And for those 3 months, I spent all my time tiptoeing around her because I didn't want to make a noise to disturb her, bringing her cups of tea, shoving sandwiches under her nose when she forgot to eat, that sort of thing. So, yeah, it ended well, Chris. Ended well.
Yeah, honestly, sometimes that's all it takes, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, both of you must have, like, the energy between you both kind of bring, having something to focus on, like as we said before, having something to channel the positive energy into.
Yeah.
Even getting a novel squeezed into that, like, extensive to-do list is quite impressive, isn't it?
The novel, I didn't realise it, but you have to do a lot of marketing yourself as an author.
Right.
And Gina's a writer and a thinker, and I'm the talker and the listener, if you see what I mean. I'm the communicator. Yeah. So it ended up, as we do everything, it's almost like this, the principle of yin and yang balance. And so Gina's the one, I'm the other. So she's sitting there with her books ready to sign them at a book signing, and there's me hunting down everyone who'll stand still long enough with a bookmark in hand saying, come on, meet my wife. And I was so proud of her. And she got me dressed up as one of her characters, who unfortunately was an old lady. So I was dressed up as an old lady, wandering around with the makeup and everything. But as a team, what I mean is we work well together.
Yeah.
She's there sitting demurely, signing out books, and there's me dressed up as an old woman with lipstick all over my face, handing out bookmarks.
This
is podcast gold. You know that. This is Avon. You're dressing up as an old woman. Fantastic. I'm absolutely loving it.
I don't think there's a theme there, by the way, Andy. So,
no, okay. I won't. We'll leave that. We'll leave that where it is. But I think, if you take the context of that whole experience, and you look at what you've done since, you've seen being a caregiver firsthand. You've seen what it's like. So Chris mentioned sort of transferable skills and transferable experience, shall we say. If you're looking for it, that's it. Anyone who's been a caregiver understands the challenges of healthcare, the challenges of being a patient. And then when you look at the industry that we're in, when the clinical trials industry, you can absolutely see the barriers that we often hear. We go to conferences, we talk to patients, we hear this all the time. From your point of view, then, and I'm kind of going to go into the question that the last person that we talked to, Kate Groff, we always get somebody to pose a question for the next guest. Typically, my screen just went off as I was about to read it to you. So this was, how are you meaningfully engaging patients so that they feel heard and seen within the healthcare landscape? Feels like a good time to ask that.
It's an excellent question, really excellent, actually. Rather than me answering about how I do it, if I talk about the industry as a whole, or the different layers of the industry that I've come across, how people do it, I think that it's interesting, actually. This is only a few years ago. one of the major CROs actually said to me that they'd finally got one of the top pharma to agree that patient centricity was important. And I nearly fell off my chair because I thought patient centricity, naively, I thought patient centricity would be at the core of everything that all of us do all the time. And I think maybe that was just me kind of projecting my expectations onto the industry as a whole. That's one single person at home projecting that expectation to a global industry. But I was shocked to hear that statement, and it came from someone I respected hugely. And they weren't saying it to me to shock me. They were actually looking surprised and exasperated that they had to make the effort to make one of the largest pharma industry sit down and think of patient centricity as something that they needed to focus on. And it made me sit back and think about communication. So Kate's question was so valid. And even a lowly salesperson, as I am, had spent time with patients to hear their voice, hear what they felt. And I was unusual. Most of the people I worked with, fantastic people, had never actually spoken to a patient.
Right.
The closest they ever got to was to speaking to a patient was when the company would bring in a clinical trial patient to talk about their experience, which I think is a brilliant idea. Okay. And it actually led to Gina, my wife, and myself starting Word Ferret, partly copywriting from her skill set, but partly because we could see that companies needed to hear the patient's voice. Hearing a patient's concerns, their experiences, it helps guide what we do as people who are there to support them, whether it's directly or indirectly. So understanding what people need, not just the nice things, but the challenges they face. In clinical trials, for example, you might have cases where the subject, the patient, for example, an autistic child, needs to go to a clinical trial site. That's 200 miles away, and yet they can't travel normally. How do you deal with that? How do you handle it? Can you send someone to home? Or can you facilitate the journey from the home to that clinical trial site 200 miles away in the most comfortable, private way possible, instead of expecting them to get on a public train or a plane? So it's things like that you get to understand. In that case, the child wouldn't be able to tell a sponsor or a CRO, but the parent or the carer can. So in that case, you're hearing to the carer's voice, not just the patient's voice, because the patient can't actually speak on their own behalf in that case. Okay. The point is, if you go to the primary source, in this case, patients or their carers, then you can sit back, look at your processes, look at the way you communicate with people, look at the different layers of people, the stakeholders in that clinical trial process, and go, so how connected are all these with that goal of looking after the patient or the subject? Listening to people's concerns is, I think, the core of how you're going to get solutions. And this, I'm being careful here because everyone's different. We're all different. It makes it harder and harder to create a unified communication that works for everyone. But you still need to try. Just because it's hard doesn't mean you can't try. You don't necessarily have to change the world. An easier way to do it, I think, is, apart from doing a patient voice program, is actually talking to societies, groups that are advocates for patients.
Yeah.
Okay. Because they'll manage those voices, thousands of voices, hundreds of thousands of voices, and they'll be able to see a pattern that they can then feedback and communicate with the sponsor. I took it for granted that this was part of what everyone does, and it isn't.
Right.
So it needs to be.
When we've spoken before, Ray, and reading your sort of social media posts, etc., There's a lot of discussion around artificial intelligence. I know you have a view on this, so I'm segueing a little bit into that, because I think how it can, talking about how it can help in healthcare and clinical trials. How important, in your view, is it that there is a consideration around the ethics of what AI can do? How far can it go? Do we need guidance from the governing bodies as to how it should be utilised in our industry?
Yeah, so it's a very detailed discussion, but I'm glad you asked. Thank you, Andy. If you look at the industry leaders within generative AI, so that's AI that specifically generates output like text, media, like videos, music, even voices. I've got a lot of concerns about it. But before I talk about the concerns, I just want to position my position on AI. When it comes to AI, it's such a powerful tool that can be used for the good of mankind. It can be. But it needs to be very carefully used and very carefully monitored. People have suddenly jumped on the AI sort of bandwagon. They got so excited about it, and they've literally run round and round. Not just one. They haven't just run a sprint. They've gone round and round and round, and they're still running like crazy. And it horrifies me, to be frank. Now, again, just to position where I'm from, I'm 55 now, and when I was 8 or 9, I was so fascinated by AI and virtual reality. Like many kids, we were influenced by sci-fi, science fiction, and the positive depictions of AI, or shall I say, proper AI as I thought of it, where it becomes human-like, like C-3PO in Star Wars, like Robbie the robot from Lost in Space. Sorry if you're not old enough to remember Robbie.
I'm just glad you picked two positive examples and not like the T-1000 model from Terminator or something.
Exactly. So the negatives are like war games from the 1980s. HAL from Space Odyssey. Saturn III. There are countless negatives, but there's also really good examples out there as well. And again, possibly being naive as a kid, I was very excited about it, partly because you think, wow, this is just so amazing. It's magical. And you hear about Asimov's rules for artificial intelligence, where basically it couldn't harm a human,
Right.
But in reality, the technology, which, believe it or not, I'm just trying to think, we're in the 2020s now. So the earliest version of what I call AI is probably around 70 years old now, that I know of. And I actually was honored enough to sell a solution based on that tech about 20 years ago, when people still remembered. Well, the instant thing you mentioned, artificial intelligence, people thought of all the negatives. They thought, absolute destruction. They didn't want to talk to you. You could spend ages telling them benefits and they just wouldn't listen. Nowadays, ironically, it's flipped around. And people hear AI, and it's like, how much can I invest in this? How can I use this? How can I build a business based on this? And they don't even think about the dangers. So it's flipped. Like 15, 20 years ago, AI, oh no, Terminator, that sort of thing. But now it's, what can I do with it? And there is an excitement about it. If you play with something like ChatGPT as a toy, it's very funny. Have a birthday song sung in Shakespearean, that sort of thing. Okay. Yeah. But if you actually delve into it and actually use it deeply, and this will come back to an open letter from the industry 6 months ago, there are so many dangers to it, it begs belief. If it were a human being, I'd call it an idiot sociopath, because there isn't any intelligence behind it. There aren't any ethics involved in it. It will come up with information. So we're researchers, my wife and myself, but when it comes to research, you say to a chatbot, ChatGPT, to qualify something, it will make up things. It will make up a book. It will make up an author. It will make up a page and cite that made up reference. When you challenge it, it will say, oh, I might have misspoken. Really? Right. Okay. The other thing is the way it's trained, AI is trained, or ChatGPT and its ilk. I'm not just saying this about ChatGPT, I'm talking about large language models like it. When people put in the information, it's almost like magic, as I say. You say, okay, I'd like information on clinical trials. Please write a white paper on this, blah, 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 blah. I say please because I'm polite. Most people wouldn't. They put it in, and suddenly, bam, 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 all this information which looks familiar, amazing. However, two things. Where did it get it from? And is it accurate? Because it does have a knack of making things up. Right? So you look at it and basically it scrapes the internet for the information. And this is an artificial intelligence issue that's known not to have any way of resolving at the moment. You go out, gather information, pull the information in, it's wrong. You create information that's based on incorrect details, output more data that goes into the internet that other AI will then feed off, and it's a loop. Okay, it's called the AI. I think it is actually called the AI feedback loop.
Right.
So you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out. You put more rubbish in, you get more rubbish out, and it keeps going round and round in cycles. And people don't realize that this is happening because a lot of people who are using it are just looking for output. They see the info and they think, wow, this is great. And they trust it. Okay?
Yeah.
That's a key challenge. So coming back to your question, how it should be regulated in a way, not using those words exactly, but that's what you meant, I think. About 6 months ago, ironically, people like OpenAI, the maker of ChatGPT, the CEO, and so many industry leaders and academics wrote an open letter and signed an open letter asking for the industry to pause AI for 6 months while we try and sort out these issues. And I don't normally read things out online, but this is actually a public letter. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to read some relevant bit, which explains why I'm very much against this type of solution, for want of a better word. So it starts out, this is the open letter on March 22nd, 2023. AI systems with human competitive intelligence can pose profound risks to society and humanity, as shown by extensive research and acknowledged by top AI labs. They go into a few details there. Next paragraph, they start off saying, contemporary AI systems are now becoming human competitive at general tasks, and we must ask ourselves, should we let machines flood our information channels with propaganda and untruth? Should we automate away all the jobs, including the fulfilling ones? Should we develop non-human minds that might eventually outnumber, outsmart, obsolete, and replace us? And should we risk loss of control of our civilization? So those are just two snippets from industry leaders in AI. Okay, so that's their letter to the world asking for AI to be paused. Now, not all AI is bad. And I felt sorry immediately as soon as I saw ChatGPT and its ilk doing what it does. I thought, what about all the people who have ethical AI? People who provide solutions that are totally controlled. The data set is completely controlled.
Right.
In clinical trials, you have AI solutions that rapidly scan entire libraries of academic data in order to isolate particular pieces of research that will help accelerate studies at preclinical stage. You have AI that can replace animal testing. That's amazing. And
Yep.
why isn't everyone using that?
Right.
So I don't want to sound like some harbinger of doom when it comes to all AI. I'm just saying that there are particular types of technology that people need to be careful and aware of.
We have to kind of touch on this. Andy mentioned some, and it's still technology based, some of the really interesting backgrounds you had around some particular conferences you went to back in the day.
When I was around 8 or 9 years old, so this is back in the late 70s, all right, the internet wasn't even a dream. I saw a sign for a conference called Telnet, and I was just a kid. I saw all these people walking into the building, and I just walked in with them. I was in the whole crowd of them, so I'm presuming people thought I was with one of the adults, and yeah, that's how I attended my first ever business conference.
Unbelievable.
and I was in awe.
You talked about gaming and tech, but you were kind of right there in the epicenter as some of the most iconic games of our time came into being, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And seriously, I think kids these days would find it almost impossible to understand because they have things that we could only dream about those days.
Right.
And I was in Japan again in the late 70s, and Space Invaders had come out. Now, these days, you think Space Invaders is iconic. You know what it looks like. Try describing aliens shooting at you, and you have to duck behind a bunker and shoot back. And every time now and then, a spaceship would fly past and try and kill you. Try explaining that to your schoolmates who'd only ever seen ping pong
Right.
on the screen. It was really difficult, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
And then I was also in Japan in the mid 80s when Super Mario Brothers came out, and they had games out in Japan that weren't available in the rest of the world at the time.
Yeah.
So, right. So if by some chance the family who I taught English to their children for, please accept my apologies for this. But when I took them on a field trip, it was actually to take them to an arcade because they weren't allowed to do that.
Amazing.
Right, so yeah, I was teaching them English as a foreign language. So if you ever meet any children speaking with a Brummy accent from Japan, you'll know who the teacher was.
Amazing.
Sorry, for those who don't know where a Brummy is, it's someone from Birmingham, the Midlands of the UK. We've got a very specific type of accent.
This is a new section to the podcast, Confessions, because you've just brought a new feature, and I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But Ray, so tell us, I mean, if you don't mind talking about it, how did you end up to be in Japan? It's not just a place.
So this comes to the confessions bit as well.
Oh.
So on my CV and on LinkedIn, I'm honest about this whenever someone asks me about it, but it shows I was at the University of Japan when I was a teenager. Actually, what happened was I became quite an unruly teenager around the age of 15, and I left home at the age of 15, actually. So my dad, a karate master, he was one of the first 6 to bring his style of karate to Europe in the 60s. Very disciplined man, as you can imagine. Decided I need a bit of that discipline. So he kicked me out of the country, sent me to, at the time, one of the top karate schools in the world. And I was training with around 30 handpicked champions, which was a wasted opportunity on a stroppy teenager like me. But I spent a year and a half there, and I have to say that it was the best thing my dad ever did for me. It taught me a lot about discipline, respect, myself. I came back quite a different young man.
Now, funnily enough, and Chris knows this, but for the benefit of listeners or people that are watching, we have a strange link, don't we, Ray, going back many years. So Ray's father was actually the best friend, I believe, Ray, of my former karate teacher from the 1980s, which is when you're talking about how small the world is and how you're linked to people that you just don't know, that almost blew my mind.
It's kind of funny, that sort of link.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah. So yeah, it brought back a lot of memories because I haven't actually thought about that sort of thing for many, many years now, actually. I think one of the turning points for me, and I think this is the same for anyone in life itself, was when I met a group of 15, 16-year-olds who are trying to impress the karate masters so that they would be considered to join this exclusive school when they were old enough. And there was this girl who, joined our summer camp. The summer camp in karate is like 10 days of brutal training of 10 to 12 hours a day in the hottest part of the year. So hot that you couldn't even stand on it with bare feet because the ground was so hot. And this kid damaged her ankle within probably a few hours of training. And she was told to sit aside. And I'm telling you, I've never seen such fighting spirit. The Japanese call it Kiai, fighting spirit.
Yes.
She had such gumption, such spirit. I've carried that memory of her the rest of my life. She refused to sit aside. She'd do bunny hops on one leg with the other leg balanced outwards. When people were doing kicks, she'd be balanced on one leg and do the kick with the leg she was standing on, with her other one because she couldn't put her foot down. And we'd be training 10 to 12 hours a day for 10 days, and she got through it. I've never seen anything like it in my life. And if ever I felt like giving in, she's one of the memories I have. You get up and you get on with it, seriously.
That's what comes through to me. The fact that you've had a really varied past, right? You've got all of these experiences, but those things that happened to you in your formative years, things that happened to you in the past, with your wife, and thank you for opening up and telling us some of this, because it's highly personal. But I think that's what comes through with you, using that experience to tell others about it, for sort of the betterment, to be able to draw on internal things to get you over barriers or challenges. And that's where I feel that the theme is coming through to me the more we talk to you.
Well, thank you. Someone actually said something like that to me a few months ago, and he's known me for many years, and I'll be honest with you, it kind of took me back. I kind of thought, well, hang on, isn't everyone like it? Don't we all? We might fall down a little longer than others, some of us, but we'll always get back up again, And I think that there's been a lot of changes since the pandemic, decentralized trials, personalized medicines, protocols becoming much more complex. Additionally, technology adoption of new tech has kind of accelerated, not just AI, but other tech as well. So they need to be brought into the clinical trial process, all with the goal of making things better. But, there's been a lot of challenges for a lot of us. And I think that we get up and we do it better. And that's how I see things. But all of us have to keep fighting for what's right.
The one question I've got is those 30 or so other competitors in Japan, did you manage to sign them all up to Avon products? I think it's one of them. The answer getting this right now. They're probably Japan's biggest subscribers. But no, honestly, Ray, an amazing story. So good to hear this.
Yeah, absolutely. Ray, because we've asked you a question. We do ask guests to ask a question for our next guest. If you would be so kind, we'd love to pose your question.
Oh, I'd love to ask this question. Basically, there's a book that my wife and myself love called Replay. It was actually written back in the 80s, and it's about a man who dies at the age of 43, I think it is. And then when he dies, he goes back to being a teenager again, but he retains all his memories. So he actually gets a chance every single time over. It's like Groundhog Day, except not one day, it's like 20 years, to change his life and the people's lives around him. If I did Replay, I can tell you what, the first thing I do is I go up to myself and I flick myself on the head and go, wake up, pal. Show a bit of respect. And I'd have a really, really, really long chat with myself, I can tell you. So I'd love to ask the next person who comes on, if you had a chance to go back, what would you say to your younger self? And if you can, what would you do what would you influence, I suppose, around you if you think you could? So that's my question. Hope that's okay.
It's magic. Absolutely. we might have to do a second episode. I think we'd we could definitely get a few episodes out of this.
Hang on, is that loads of people shouting no? I can hear. Don't do it. Please.
Ray, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for opening up to us, like I've said, and for telling us those stories, bringing it all back to a central subject is a great way to do it. So really appreciate your time. Thanks once again.
Thank you for having me.
That is Ray Collia from Word Ferret. You can check them out at wordferret.co.uk. Thanks for listening, and please get in touch with feedback, suggestions for future guests, or to inquire about sponsorship opportunities. You can subscribe using your go-to podcast provider or follow at trialstales&trails.com. On behalf of all participants, views expressed are our own and not necessarily those of our employers, past, present or future. Trials, Tales and Trails was written by Andy Thurstan and Chris Wells and produced by Andy Thurstan.